Hey everyone, I'm sick today. This is gonna be kind of a short one. I just wanted to pop on because I don't think I've done anything this month so far. The month's about halfway over. Oh man. So I don't even know where to start here. I'm really disorganized today. Just got done with my midterms, so I'm a little frazzled. I took yesterday basically entirely off because in addition to midterms, me and my whole family got sick last week, so it was just this ball buster of a week. I was quite frazzed. Yesterday I watched Heroes Shed No Tears for the podcast I'm doing with Brendan today, so we're going to be talking about that. That was a fun little movie. It's not something you should watch if you're trying to relax, though. Like, if you're trying to unwind and relax, maybe a couple of nice episodes of Speed Grapher, Twin Peaks, some really light like that. And Heroes Shed No Tears was dense. It was like cheesecake. Like, yeah, it was like cheesecake in that, like, you only really want a little slice of cheesecake. It's really delicious, and you think you want more, but then when you get more, you're like, oh, no, actually, I'm really full on that wall of cheesecake I just ate. So, maybe not. So that's my review in a nutshell. I'll probably actually use a different and better metaphor when I get to the podcast. So, well, let's see. What's happening on Tanchang lately? I've been stuck for the last couple of weeks. I didn't really have a lot of extra free time to do writing, unfortunately, with all the stuff that was going on. And so I'm on, like, the last paragraph of a blog post that I've just been sitting there like, oh, I need to write this and get it out. Oh, I need to write it and get it out. And I just haven't. It's been deprioritized over and over again, which I shouldn't have done. However, there was something good that came out of that deprioritization. I got off my tuchus, and I finally comprehensively and finally rewrote All Above Heaven, Act 1. So that finally has a unified voice. I even unified all of David's writing with it, so it's got a nice, clear, consistent tone. Ryan helped me out with the technical editing, and I think he did a really good job of, like, giving us feedback that really kind of, like, spoke to it. I noted most of the feedback was in the prose section, which was all David's stuff. David did not actually notice it. I noted. I put the document up while I was working on it, and I was like, for the whole team to check out. So it was me and David, Jurgen, Vic, who all had access to it. And I was like, okay, here's some changes that I made, and I'm going to keep making changes going through it. And David was the only one who really got on there and made any significant changes. And what he did was one of Ryan's pieces of feedback was to move a little introduction section from where it was at the very beginning to the beginning of a different section, so that it kind of acted as a soft intro and a link between the different kinds of writing styles. And I did that. It's one of the first things I did, because I was like, oh, that's a good idea, we should try that out. And David got in there, and basically the only thing he did that really changed it was he just went down, grabbed that, moved it back where it was, and that's it. He did very little else. He did a couple of things, but, like, that was the most significant change, to give you an idea, was just moving that paragraph. And he was, like, really livid about it. He was like, that totally ruins the flow. We can't put it there. What's wrong with you? So I'm going to defer to David's wisdom on that one. Thing is that it's his writing. It's my feeling he can take the editing however he wants to. Ryan is a really good editor. Any change that he proposed, I simply make. For the most part, whenever I get editing, I have about a 3-minute long emotional breakdown when I'm, like, shrieking at the computer screen because my vanity has been punctured. But then after all of that runs out, I'm like, oh, you know what, actually, these are good changes. I'm glad that we have these. I'm glad we have another objective opinion. I'm going to make all these changes. And I just do literally one for one everything they told me to do. Ryan, as a contrast to the other technical editor, or to the other editors, we had a proper editing pass, and then we had Ryan as the technical editor. In contrast, the different editing styles, a technical editor will sometimes give you feedback on how to shape the writing, whereas a more concrete editor will just make changes or suggest very clear, clean, small changes to make. A lot of Ryan's advice was kind of like writing advice almost. And so a lot of times when you're taking the advice of technical editing, you have to go back and you have to write again. You actually have to be creative and change the way a paragraph feels, or change your word choice, or how you introduce ideas. So I tried to make the smallest changes possible, especially, as I mentioned before, because the bulk of them were David's text. Uh, David has a very particular writing style. If you're a big fan of Legends of the Wulin, you probably got very well acquainted with it. All of the really good prose in there, as far as I can tell, is David's, and this is working with him for a few years. I never grilled him on what he wrote versus what he didn't, but having seen what he wrote for our game and what he writes to us, he's got a pretty, his fingerprints are pretty clear on whenever you're looking at writing. Okay, that's definitely Ramirez writing. And I think part of that is one of the reasons I really love working with David is that he's a very creative and very passionate guy. And so when he writes, there's this sizzling enthusiasm behind everything he says that makes it a real joy to read. So you guys are in for a treat here pretty soon. We got the writing done on that, and then this last week, actually the day before yesterday, the day before yesterday and the day before that, so basically through the weekend, me and Vic were working on figuring out how to do the layout. And Vic actually, he's a graphic designer, and so he spent basically his whole weekend busting his hump getting the graphic design in a really good shape. It's not done yet. I think we're going to probably put one more weekend behind it, which sucks because that means I've got to take, because he works like a 50-hour-a-week job, like a 50, 60-hour-a-week job, in addition to being a family man. So, he worked a 50, 60-hour week, and then he worked for me all weekend, and now he's going to do that again. So, to give you an idea of how dedicated this guy is, he really has a lot of passion for this game, and he's very skilled. I actually sent it around to a couple of select members of my growing cult of personality. So, and it got like really positive, like very positive reviews. Thankfully, we have the beautiful Krzysztof Grabelski art as well to kind of spice it up. Vic expressed some sentiment about how it didn't have quite enough art, so I'm talking to some other artists right now to see if we can't get some margin art in there. I think it looks great, even with the very minimal art, just because the quality of the art that we got from Krzysztof was so high. I've actually been really pleased with the artists we've had for this project, because we've had Krzysztof Grabelski for All Above Heaven, and then we had Paweł Kolelniec for Tian Sheng, and they both just are such unbelievably good artists. They're both really good to work with. Krzysztof got really busy. Like, he actually got like a steady gig while he was freelancing with us. And the arrangement we had with him was to do things below his normal. The normal amount he charges was a little high for our projects. We're just starting out, so he's like, "Hey, look, I'm really passionate about this project. You're really good to work with. How about I cut you a deal and do it for a little below my normal rates, and then I'll just deprioritize it so it gets done as the caboose of everything else during a month." And I was like, "That's a great deal." But what that resulted in was we got delayed so long he actually picked up actual steady employment before he was done. So I had to renegotiate that at about like the 7 or 8 month mark and be like, "Hey, look, how about we just get this project done and I'll pay you a little bit, like I'll push up to your normal rates for the rest of it, just so we can get what's like quarter and halfway done, and then we'll get that done." So a lot of that was interesting. I never renegotiated a contract before, so that was a fun little experience to have. Thankfully, Krzysztof is such a peach to work with. He really is a cool guy, and he works fast. And if you've seen his art, I've posted on the blog and a couple other places. It's so high quality. It's beautiful stuff. I got Cheesecake Factory Dulce de Leche for my coffee here. So to give you an idea of just how much I'm spoiling myself being sick, I spent like $5 on a thing of creamer for my coffee, which feels a little bit bourgeois of me, but whatever. It's almost Christmas time. I deserve some good creamer. I deserve it. I've earned it. I have it. I really have it. I've even done dishes. Ugh, man, I'm a mess today. But still, working on this stuff. Okay, so that's what that's all looking like. So All Above Heaven is coming down the pike. I want to do it as both a print on demand and as a PDF, and of course, the PDF is going to be pay what you want. So anybody who wants to grab it can just grab it and try it out with their friends. My suspicion, though, is that this is a game with enough elements that sit on the table, you know, because you roll your dice and you line them in front of you and spin them because of the way the effort pool works. And there's things like the prana pools and things like that. My suspicion is that you're going to want to get that printed out. And so, for, again, the very first time, looking at the print-on-demand options that One Bookshelf offers through DriveThruRPG.com, and like it looks like it's pretty technical to set it up, but after that, like, seems like it's pretty cheap. I don't like. There's a lot of question about like, do they have good paper quality? What's that going to cost and that kind of thing. What I'm currently looking to do is to minimize the cost with the print-on-demand. I don't want to make it so that it's effectively at cost just for their printing. Like, I do want to get a little bit of money to come back into the project, because every time the money comes into the project, we have just a little bit more to grease the wheels for things like tempting Vic to work another part-time job for us so we can get really good layout, or like paying for some art so we can slowly fill the books with art. We've had to kind of ease back on that. I put a lot of money into that initially, and then David threw some behind it too. And like, we're not like putting the brakes on putting our own money to the project. I think that would be kind of churlish at this sort of formative stage. But we are being a little more. We're learning how to buy art and where we need art and what it needs to do for the product. So like, we're doing a lot less than we did initially. Initially, I put up like $600 for doing art, and like, now I realize that was probably too much for the scale of the project. Just did put out of personal funds. I think if I had like kickstarted it, that would have been completely. I'd probably been under budget, frankly. But there's a lot to learn about the actual business side of this. So, and we've effectively been learning as we go. Unlike EOS Press and guys like that, where presumably they had some business acumen beforehand. Like, I'm getting my business degree now, after starting this project is when I went into college for business. So this is a fascinating learning experience. I hope to put it on a resume someday. My cat is a beautiful calico, but she is such an idiot. Hi, Mira. She will put up with anything, though. Like, she never gets cranky, ever. So, like, the kids will poke and prod her, and she's just like, purr. But yeah, you might be able to hear a little purr there. She's a sweetie. Oh, you know when I was at the computer, didn't you? Oh, golly. Alright, so what's on the horizon for all of this? Well, I've been doing a lot of, I've been rewriting the martial arts styles for Lone Wolf Fist. That's been on the docket lately. Because I've been thinking in a metagame sense about, like, what do I want the metagame to be about the Kung Fu techniques. And I really like how much you play the game at the table with the way it's currently designed. Like, you have to go and find a master, find a manuscript to get the powers from them. You have to hit XP triggers and do stuff to get XP. It's not just you get XP at the end of the session. You have to do stuff actively in the game to get it. So there's a good incentive structure to it. And now my dog is jealous of my cat, so I'm just petting everybody. That pig. A lot of animals, by the way. Well, I have two. And then, of course, my wife. I'm kidding. I know she's not ever going to watch this. But if this would be the one thing she would watch. Oh, Lord. But yeah, so I've been... But even... like, so this isn't a build game. This isn't a game where you sit down, like... one of the things that I feel like Torpedoed Exalted really badly was that you had to choose 10 charms at the beginning. And that invited a lot of metagame analysis, especially considering how lethal that game could get. Oh, go away. I'm done with you now. Go lie down. Go. Get. Go to one of your many things you claimed as your bed. That's right. Get out. She's a good dog, but she's annoying. Anyway, one of the things that Torpedoed Exalted was the invitation to metagame. Magic players became role players around 3.0 because Wizards of the Coast got TSR and they got D&D, and they made an edition of D&D which ported a lot of the very successful design principles from Magic the Gathering. However, the kind of culture that created in gaming has been a real clash of ideas and expectations. So you have a lot of people who play games in a purely competitive way. You can play Magic purely competitively. You don't have to get into the story of Magic to be good at Magic. As a matter of fact, it didn't even exist for a long time. It didn't even exist until, like, Weatherlight came out. So, like, nobody gives a crap about the story of Magic the Gathering. And you don't you don't play Magic the same way you play war games, which is what the original DNA of the first role-playing games were based off of. Like, role-playing games are an extremely social activity, and Magic the Gathering is an extremely casual social activity. Like, you have to invest a lot of passion and effort as a hobbyist into making an army for a war game. You classically, you would game with your friends in a role-playing. You'd be friends first, and then the game would develop afterwards. There's this new culture that Magic introduced where kind of like competitive chess, where you don't really have to know your opponent before you play a game with them. And that can invite... There's like social filters that we have for people that we like to associate with, and if you bypass those filters, you wind up associating with people that rub you the wrong way sometimes. And so, like, in a purely competitive environment, that's not too bad, because the ultimate, like, the overall environment of sportsmanship can prevail. But as soon as you start mixing that competition with any other social dimension, you invite a whole host of other things to happen. Well, role-playing games, since they have been co-opted or acquired effectively, because the king of role-playing games is going to be D&D, and when the king is ill, the land suffers. Well, since the Magic the Gathering crew, the guys who created that, your Mark Rosewaters and your Richard Garfields and people like that, since they got Dungeons and Dragons and they created 3rd edition, everything past 3rd edition has always had this element of casual to it, where you're supposed to find the game first, and whether or not you become friends afterwards is secondary, because the game itself is a product, and they can sell a product to you, but they cannot sell friendship to you, nor imagination. So, most, maybe all problems in the modern kind of role-playing culture that we have stem from that central introduction, that culture shock of Dungeons and Dragons, and basically all of role-playing beginning to look at itself like a marketable commodity like Magic the Gathering, like a game first and then a social activity second. So yeah, I don't remember where I was going with that. Oh, the meta analysis. Okay, so one of the things about Magic that's actually really great about Magic is, and I happen to love this about Magic, is the meta game. And to define that, because it's irritating when people start using the term meta without really understanding what it means. The game is just playing the game, and the meta game is talking and thinking about the game. It's the thing that is outside of the game, hence the term meta. So it's very simple. But the meta game of Magic is really fascinating, because the playing in the game of Magic is very casual and very quick and very clinical. You don't really have to worry too much about the sort of social dimension of playing it, unlike in Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing games, because you don't really have to worry about the feelings of your opponent. You don't really have to worry about, like, introducing non-game elements to the game, although there is some of that, by the way. I once, at the last tournament I went to forever ago during the Innistrad block, I've not been playing Magic very much, but I did go to Innistrad because it was cool, because it had werewolves in it. And I went to a booster draft tournament, which is my favorite kind of tournament. And I made a fairly mediocre direct damage black and red deck. It was like kind of like build off the sly sort of thing, where it just went really fast. And I got to the one of the higher tiers of that tournament, which is way past what I usually do, because I really suck at Magic, for the record. I love it, but I suck at it. What I did was I happened to get into a match with a kid that was really into Magic and really, really good and competitive, and he had a better deck than me, and he was definitely a better player. But he was like 6 years younger than me. And what happened was, being older and more cunning and wily than this kid, I just made him think that I was a much softer target than I was, and just bluffed with the cards in my hand. So he played more recklessly than he otherwise would, and I was able to exploit that and beat him. The first time he was mono-screwed, so I got kind of lucky there. But the second time he just assumed I was an idiot. And that assumption of me being an idiot and the recklessness that engendered in play allowed me to win and get way higher than I normally place. So, Oh, by the way, I was immediately wrecked in the very next game because again, I'm just not a very good player, and the guy that wrecked me had this. He happened. It was a booster draft, but he managed to get this extremely cohesive like green token deck out of it. So I was like his playing was fantastic, truly tournament caliber. And I don't feel bad about getting wrecked by that guy because my deck was much less focused and sloppier because I'm not as good at playing as those people. But it was a delight to get wrecked by him. Point being, you can introduce non-game elements to Magic, and you can even do so competitively. So if you happen to be a competitive Magic player, don't forget things that competitive poker and chess players do. The whole social dimension. Don't ignore it just because it's not part of the strict playing of the game. You leverage those to your advantage. Leverage your opponent's psychology. But even if you don't do that, if you happen to just be really good and clinical about the way you play the game, you can do that. And so the metagame analysis of Magic the Gathering is very clean because you can talk about like mana curve, and you can talk about wow, that cat really wants outside. Anyway, you can talk about the game elements very cleanly, and because you can look at the math behind those, it's really easy to predict them, and it's easy to make very clear, true analyses of that. So the metagame, talking about the metagame in Magic is fun and exciting because you can genuinely discover things. There's a constantly changing environment in Magic, and you can discuss trends in tournaments, and trends are based off of a very bloodless, very almost an economic look at the way the environment of tournaments is shaping up. So that's really fascinating analysis, and it's fun, and it's a satisfying element of the game. It's about half to 2/3 of the reason that I ever played Magic was the metagame analysis. I thought it was really fun and cool. Here's a problem with that, though. You can't do that with a role-playing game. Not in the same way, because it's really destructive to a role-playing game. And the reason is, you don't get new sets of a role-playing game every year. That's the reason. Role-playing game is a product that you make an investment in a core book, and you want to see an almost infinite return for your money in that investment. For example, you buy the really big, fat Pathfinder core book. That's a hell of a core book. I'm not a huge fan of Pathfinder. I think that I've made my feelings clear on that on a few occasions. But Pathfinder is a game I did run for a while, and I have played it. And if you wanted, it's the first edition, I've not seen the second edition, but if you wanted a really good successor to the 3.5 edition of Dungeons & Dragons, it's reasonable. It's not a huge leap. It's a 3.75. And some of their decisions were questionable with it. But that was always the case with 3rd edition and beyond, and really probably every edition had at least a few questionable decisions. I'm looking at you, Kinder. I went outside. Let me out. I want to go. I'm a cat owner. I'm stupid and crazy. You have to deal with that, folks. Anyway, a metagame analysis is not a healthy thing to introduce to a game like Pathfinder. And the reason why is because you're not going to get Pathfinder 3.85 next year. You're not going to get a whole new set of classes and races and everything. You're not going to get another take on how fighter works that you can just adopt. You can't just change your character from one character to another character. If you have an ongoing campaign, it can conceivably last more than a year. Now, for the most part, I don't think campaigns work longer than a year. Like, in my experience, about a year is what I can get out of them. I think I had a 2-year campaign once, and that's about it. It's possible to have more, though. And as a matter of fact, it used to be the norm that you had a lot more than that. As far as I can tell, as far as like talking to older folks about how they play Dungeons & Dragons, multi-year campaigns were pretty common. And as a matter of fact, it was desirable because your character got more powerful. You got more options. You could do more in the world. So, so imagine that you had an equivalent situation in Magic the Gathering where they only ever released Alpha and maybe Beta. And that's it. They never released another set. So you have a deck, and the way it works is your deck can only be made of uncommon cards, and it has to be at least 30 land when you start out. And then every week you get to swap one card of your choice for another card, but it can only be like one tier higher, so it can go from common to uncommon. And once you have a certain threshold of uncommon cards, you can then swap an uncommon card for a rare card. And in this way, you gradually make your deck more powerful over the course of however long you want to play. Further imagine that the outcome of every single game you played had an impact on the outcome of every other campaign, or every other game that you played of Magic. It altered the way you could do things. It changed an evolving world. That's what a role-playing game is. Do you think that Magic would be popular if that's what Magic was? Nope. You think it would invite a metagame analysis if that's what Magic was? No, not really. And the reason why is because there is a best way. There is a best way in every single edition of Magic the Gathering to run that tournament block. No matter what environment has ever existed in Magic the Gathering. If it existed for 3 years, 5 years, 2 years maybe even, there will be uncovered a best way, a best deck, a best strategy in that particular environment. The thing that allows them and invites a healthy metagame analysis in Magic the Gathering is the fact that it doesn't stick around long enough for that depth of analysis to occur. Because as soon as you were able to get to that depth of analysis, you would make something that we in the role-playing game world would refer to as a one true build. This is the only way you can play this game. This is the best way to play this game. This is the no-brainer build of this game. Solstice, go lie down. Seriously, you're driving me crazy. I will let you out in a minute. Okay. Everybody wants my attention. Which I guess isn't a terrible place to be, but it's annoying when you're trying to talk to all you internet folks. Oh, Jesus, I'm sick. This sucks. Anyway, so I came to the conclusion that the reason that Exalted 2nd Ed, 1st Ed, probably 3rd Ed at this point has died is just because it doesn't change enough. The metagame analysis that it has been invited to role-playing games because of Magic is enough to annihilate any game, even Magic. It can. The only reason that Magic sticks around is that there's a new tournament block every year, twice a year, or something like that. So you don't have enough time as a gaming community to analyze the absolute best way to play it. So you're always, they are basically, in economic terms, they're doing a Keynesian strategy where they're just trying to keep just ahead of that full adjustment. Role-playing games don't have that luxury. Once you make the 60 to 80 to 100, however expensive your role-playing game book is, and I have spent $60, $75 in one notable case on a role-playing game manual because my thinking is, and this is actually pretty solid thinking, I think most of us think of role-playing games this way when we actually buy one of the big fat books, is, okay, sure, it's $75. That's a lot of scratch. But number one, it's beautiful. And number two, it's going to provide me with years, maybe even decades of game that I can play and enjoy. If you divide, $75 up over a decade of playing, a $7.50 a year annual subscription to a role-playing game doesn't really sound too bad when you realize that's about 2 packs of Magic. That's half of a deck, guys. This is why Magic keeps card shops afloat and role-playing games do not. We're not even in the same league with Magic, like competition-wise. And it's done a lot of it's invited a lot of harmful elements into role-playing game design. So, like, a guy like John Chung. John Chung is kind of my gold standard for a dude that will kill a game. He is the Ashura of games. And the reason I say that, or is it Shiva? I don't remember. Anyway, he's the guy that comes and blows up the whole goddamn... I think that's Shiva, actually. It might be Kali. I don't remember. Let's assume it's Shiva for a second. Like, John Chung had a chance over the course of a long campaign in many years in Exalted 2nd Edition to analyze the game to the point where he found the best way to play it. He found all of the high-level game strategy of Exalted 2nd Edition, and it got to the point where you couldn't play Exalted without referencing something he invented, like 2-7 filters, or the hyper lethality, or just tons and tons of stuff that they found as they analyze and analyze and analyze this game. The problem is, you were never ever meant by the designers to play the game that way. Ever. It wasn't supposed to be something that you played effectively competitively. But there was a 1-2 blow of Exalted that made that happen. And the first 1-2 blow was that the environment had changed for how you play role-playing games in the first place. Magic players were now role players, so that analysis was going to happen no matter what. And the second thing was, Exalted is a game that could kill you accidentally just because you didn't happen to optimize, and it took a long time to make a character. Like, it took you much longer than it would take to whip together like a booster draft for a tournament. Solstice, go, lie down, go, get, keep going. Christ, these animals. So, like, you could make a booster draft in 20 minutes, maybe. I've never made an Exalted character in less than an hour. And I know a lot about Exalted, but there's just so many parts you have to bring together, and you have to fuse them into this unified and cohesive whole. So you combine that with the continued investment of playing the character and developing stuff and intermeshing it with the world, and this kind of overarching theme of the game of you being important and destined for greatness, and just by the nature of what you are. If you combine that with, oh, and this one guy kills you, and this one guy attacks you once and you explode, that's an unsatisfying game experience. That invited you to want to make certain that your character was tough enough to survive that, so naturally you would start going into defensive charms, and you'd see how uneven some of them are, because the people who designed that game didn't think about it on those terms. They thought, this would be cool, that would be cool. And it was cool, but it didn't come together to make a satisfying game experience. Combine that with the analysis that was invited when Magic players came in, and you basically have the perfect shitstorm to make a game that is doomed. And unfortunately, for me, that was the hill I decided to die on. I wouldn't be the first guy who died on it. I mean, like, Krzysztof Grabowski, Jeff Grabowski. Listen to me. Jeff Grabowski was the guy that did Exalt in the first fight. He doesn't seem to be even slightly, like, he sort of, like, backed away from it whenever it became toxic. The two designers, John Merck and Holden Shearer, dropped like nobody's business because, well, for whatever reason. But, like, a lot of people died on the Exalted Hill. It was a beautiful battle, but, like, it killed a lot of really good ideas. A lot of really promising careers ended because of Exalted. So, I don't know. It's a monster. And that's where I'm fighting right now. Like, that's the battle. That's the banner I took up, was the whole, like, no, we can make this work. We can do it. Well, kind of. You kind of can. That's why I've been leaning really hard on old school D&D design for the late game in the way I'm setting this one up. And that's why I leaned really hard on putting roadblocks between the players and the ability to blow up chunks of the setting. That's another thing that I've been mulling over, because, like, it's one of those things where, okay, so as a GM in any role-playing game, like, you can either do it with prep or without prep. If you do it without prep, then in my case, what I do is I'll just find something that's been prepped by someone else, and I'll just use that. Because it's, wander through the world, find something, and then investigate it, and that's basically everything for me. Find a situation and invest in it in your character, find a dungeon and explore it, find a mystery and try to get to the bottom of it. That's role playing for me. And whenever you have stuff content, for lack of a better or more robust term. You have content. You have, what is this mystery? Where did this take place? What kind of beings are there? What kind of NPCs? What are their motivations? That's all content. That required you as a GM or someone as a content creator. Classically, it's the GM, but like you can just buy modules. But like whoever did it, they created that content. Okay. The idea behind that content is for you to involve yourself with it in a way that, like, where you actually get the amount out of it that the design intended. And there's really kind of two ways to do that. There's a bad way, there's a good way in general terms. The bad way just kind of leads you around and it says there's only one way to interact with this, and the good way is you can interact with it however you want to, but when you interact with it, it unlocks its potential, and you interact with it on those terms, or whatever terms, and it gives you that, and you can be creative with how you interact with it. So like that's kind of the difference between doing an adventure path and doing like a dungeon crawl. With an adventure path, there is a right answer. It's like a choose your own adventure, but everything but one of the answers the game stops. And then the other way is like the dungeon crawl, where it's like, okay, when you're in this dungeon, here are the traps that you must be overcome through either guile or through your rolls, and here are the monsters that you have to be overcome either by interacting with them or killing them or running away from them, whatever. The challenges are there, and if you want to extract the reward of gold pieces and XP from the dungeon crawl, you have to overcome those challenges or find a way to bypass them somehow. Okay, so that's content and how you unlock it, and how you work with it, and what it does for a game. Because either of those things, in an ideal world, either of those things gets you time at the table where the players are engaged with what's going on and playing the game and satisfied. Alright, so let me talk about Dragon Ball Z. Here's your character, Vegeta, and your friend is playing Nappa, and you smash onto Earth, right? And you're in a city, and you're like, okay, the GM's like, hey, you've got to find the Dragon Balls. There's 7 magic balls that will grant you immortality. You can finally take vengeance for your fallen race and kill the evil tyrant Frieza. That's your motivation. You're like, okay, so I'm Vegeta, and this is Nappa. Alright, so we're in a city. Can we detect these things? And you're like, no, but your scouters do detect power levels that are much higher than the normal ones around here. They're over in this one desert area. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, then we don't need the city then. And the GM's like, well, remember, there's a whole city, and you can ask anyone you want, anything you want. I mean, you're really strong, so you could even beat these people up and interact with them and all that stuff. There's all kinds of stuff to do in the city, and maybe they've got some plot threads for other stuff in there. Maybe they've got some treasure, and some 3 clue rules, and some content nodes, and all kinds of stuff that they put in that city. And Vegeta's like, Nappa wastes this fucking city, we're gonna go fight those guys. So Nappa holds up his fingers, and the whole city vanishes. All that content's gone. You got like 30 seconds of gameplay out of it. Out of who knows how much prep. And you fly off and go punch the guys. That's what you do. Okay, so here's the problem with that, right? The fight scenes that happened after that were really cool. That was a fully engaged kind of, like, players engaging with content. They were engaging with it tactically. They were doing stuff. The city thing, though, is just gone. If there was any prep there, it's wasted. Because you're effectively a walking nuclear bomb. You can just, like, point at something and it goes away. That's not really interacting with the content so much as it is erasing it. So, imagine you do that in D&D. Imagine that you were Vegeta in D&D, and like someone's like, oh, you've got to go through this dungeon to get to the Dragon Ball. And he's like, I got a better idea. And he points his hand at the dungeon and explodes it, and just goes to the bottom and grabs his Dragon Ball out of it. That's what you invite when you get Dragon Ball Z levels of blow up the planet powers and put those in the hands of a character. I am all for powerful characters. I really am. I played Exalted and loved it for a long time. Until its problems became greater than the fun. That was a really cool experience. It does happen eventually. You'll hit the upward limit of Exalted very quickly. And when you do, unfortunately, there's no going back to it. most of the D&D games I run, I play almost exclusive D&D nowadays. I mean, I'm open to other things, but like D&D does what I want it to do, so I don't see a lot of reason to change. And when I do that, the players get powerful. Like in the last campaign, they had freaking dragons that they were riding around. There were like 12 hit die dragons. And I realized in that game, just like I eventually realized in my Exalted game, that whenever the players get to a certain level of competence, of like city obliterating competence, army annihilating competence, like mountain exploding competence, they don't interact with a lot of the content. What that basically does is take all the content that you were able to interact with when you were still incapable of blowing stuff up on that degree, and it says, okay, you can never rely on them interacting with it. They might take an interest, like maybe Goku and Piccolo go and try to learn how to drive in a city. Sure, like you might get a little bit out of that if they want to. But it's equally likely that it's just going to get vaporized by Dr. Gero shooting lasers out of his eyes. And then that's that. Content gone. It's not there anymore. They didn't interact with it. They didn't... Like, its interaction is summed up in a single roll, and it's completely wasted. So I'm nervous about that. Because even though I've kept content prep very lightweight and stuff like Tian Shang, I still don't want it to just vanish, you know? So I'm not really sure what to do there. There's a couple of insulating mechanisms for it. Like, generally societies, like in Lone Wolf Fist, a society is almost universally ruled by a really powerful martial arts master. So you can't just point a society and make it go boom, because they can just go and punch your Gauntlet gun or Kamehameha wave away, because they're really powerful. So that's sort of a way to shortcut to the boss fight, which is still less content, but you can also do stuff. It's better to conquer a place than it is to blow it up. If you blow it up, you remove all of its resources and wealth and all the stuff that can benefit you. And if you don't do that, then you can have all that stuff for yourself. It's also better to like socially vanquish an organization. Like if you have, like, say, I don't know, the Golden Lions, and you're a bad guy. Oh, you're a bad guy. And you're like, okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna corrupt them from the inside, and then I'm gonna beat their leaders in this tournament, and then make myself the leader of the new Golden Lions. So I'm gonna call, I don't know, the Crimson Lions or something like that. And that way I'll have a whole martial arts organization underneath of me, in addition to all of their lands and everything. And that, you can't just point at that and make it go away with like a single super powerful social technique. You know, you have to go and interact with different people and wine them and dine them. You have to fight in the tournament. There's a lot more there for the content that you've prepped. You know, and that's better. That's definitely better. Another insulating factor that Lone Wolf Fist has is that there's very few attacks that are on the scale of blowing up cities. Most of them can blow up a zone, or like a collection of zones, or I guess they're battlefields. They're zones, folks. But they can blow up a fairly sizable geographic area. Like they could maybe blow up like a whole little village, but that's a chunk of a city you could take out. You know, and that's really powerful, and that's basically your whole battery drained in one go. So if you do that, you're inviting retribution from any nearby martial artists who get really, really fast as they get more powerful. And and you're going to drain your battery, such as that unless you have someone else there who can fight them off while you recharge, you're not likely to survive the retributive strike. So there's some deterrence in the DNA of the system. But I'm still worried about it. I really am. Because just knowing that hole, that particular, what do you want to call it? That design flaw is at the end of this. Like that structural flaw is at the end of designing characters this way. It makes me really nervous. It makes me nervous because All Above Heaven is the next thing we're doing. You know, I've already gotten Act 1 in layout. It's coming out. And Act 4 is supposed to be... Actually, Act 3 and Act 4, this is a 4-act thing. Act 3 and 4 is where the players will start to get those levels of power. And in All Above Heaven, it is that cosmic Dragon Ball Z scale stuff. So, I'm concerned. I'm concerned because I still want you to be able to interact with the world in an exploratory way, in an investigative way, in an intrigue-based way. I do. And I don't know if that kind of design can survive Dragon Ball Z levels of blow up the planet by pointing at a power. I don't know. I'm worried about it. I'm really worried about it, and it's one of the reasons that I've made content prep so light, and I've made it so clean and easy to put onto just a couple of pages worth of work. There's a reason that I've made it so that you can do it on the fly, so you can go description first and then mechanics after. And I did that because sometimes you will only have the description of a planet. Like, say they go to a brand new planet and you're like, oh, it's a lush jungle planet. That's the whole description. And they're like, hey, we need to be at a jungle planet. We have training we can do here. Let's investigate. Oh, okay, I didn't prep anything past the phrase jungle planet. So you can just kind of describe things as a GM, and then as they choose to interact with them, you can put mechanics on them. You don't have to prep in those scenarios. You can be, for lack of a better term, an improv GM, which is good. We want that. We want you to be able to improvise, because there might not be any guarantee that they're not going to be like, boring, and just blow up the planet right then. If there's no work that you put into it, there's no loss, and that's good. But, but if there's work, there's loss. So yeah, there's some musings for y'all. I've been on here for, oh dear, a while. I'm gonna put this back on and watch it and see if I rambled too much. My suspicion is that I did. I'm gonna blow my nose, do that, and I guess I'll post this. You know, Patreon, give you guys a 1 week head start on those non-patron masses. Anyway, take care, everyone.